Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tori Jones, here again with my co-host Eric Brandt. Welcome to episode 2 of the Blazers Uprise Podcast. Now, we had our first episode that dropped on Monday. If you haven't watched that, I suggest you go check it out. But this episode is going to be a ton of fun. We're only going to be talking about trades today, and I'm really excited to do this because I'm somebody who loves those hypothetical trades. I know the CBA really well, and Eric's the same way as me.
Yeah, for the last couple off seasons, we've been trying to get rid of contracts all summer.
Yep.
Trying to find creative ways to get rid of Turner without attaching assets to him to do so. So it'll be interesting this summer to make trades since we got rid of all the bad contracts this summer.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun talking about, trying to get star players to help us really reach that, top level of contention compared to how do we get Evan Turner's contract off our roster.
Right.
So I really like the position we're in. I really like some of the tradable assets that we have now, because before we really didn't have tradable assets. We had a ton of bad contracts and we had our core pieces. So me and Eric, we know the CBA so well, we can check if trades work or don't work without a trade machine. Like, most of the time when I come up with a hypothetical trades, I actually add up the salary in a calculator and then I do the math that way. So if you don't know like basic trade rules, that's fine, but especially when you're suggesting hypothetical trades on this channel, it does help if the trade actually can possibly work in real life. You know what I mean? So there's times where I get some weird trade suggestions that don't work under the CBA. But me and Eric, everything we're going to suggest today should work under the CBA. We know our stuff, we've done our math, and Eric has a bunch of trade suggestions for me. A lot of them I don't know, so we'll see what he has for me. But they should all work under the CBA, unless you're slipping a little bit.
These are all work under the CBA, but I brought some. I like to go into other teams' forums and kind of see how they value Portland players. So I go in, look for trades that involve Blazers, and then either laugh at how incredibly crappy they are and how undervalued players are, or you can get a good frame of reference for like a guy like Simons. We're all excited about him, but the rest of the league has no idea what's coming.
Oh, I know. He's
just this throw into all these trades. We'll get 3 first-round picks from the Blazers and Simons and Collins, and it gets ridiculous sometimes. Yeah. But I went through and got some kind of interesting and funny ones, and I just wanted to throw them at you to see what you said. But these aren't necessarily my trade ideas.
Oh, I'm really curious. I'm excited to see what you have, and I'm sure everybody watching is pretty excited because everybody loves trades. Even if it's September, even if our roster's set, everybody loves trades. So this is that episode. This is that podcast for you guys that love those trades. So
we'll always try to talk about trades.
Oh yeah. During the season, during the season when we're live, when we have our live chat here, you guys can toss us questions about trades, and we'll have a segment of the podcast where we just talk to live chat, maybe 2 to 3 times a podcast episode. So definitely once rumors start getting underway, we'll cover every single rumor that's attached to the Portland Trail Blazers. That'll be a regular thing on these podcasts. I might not do a video on every small little rumor, but we'll definitely talk about them here when we have an hour to just dive in as deep as we want into a hypothetical trade or a trade rumor. So do you have anything else you want to say for this intro, or do you just want to start hopping into some of these trade targets?
Well, let's just get into a little bit about the Blazers situation right now.
Yes.
So for this season, we have a little over $145 million in guaranteed, which is well over the luxury tax.
Top in the league, top payroll in the league, I believe.
You do have to factor in any trades that are, even if it's only like $1 million or $2 million more, that work under the CBA. If it adds salary, it's also adding more than that with tax implications.
Yeah.
So you can't just trade like a $10 million guy for a $14 million guy and then keep doing that, and then eventually you have like 20 more million in salary plus all the tax on top of that. So you got to kind of watch where you're spending. Jody so far has been willing to spend, it seems like,
Thank
but
God.
we can't get crazy and go like
Yeah.
100 million into the luxury tax. And then we've talked about this before, but the the cap implications of trading for a player that's under contract for more than 1 year, we kind of figured out that the cap space isn't really going to be enough to make a difference next summer.
Yeah, and I'll have a video talking about why it doesn't really make much sense for the Portland Trail Blazers to try and pursue cap space next season or next offseason. And it mostly revolves around Rodney Hood because we're probably going to want to bring him back, and at that point we don't have more money than the mid-level exception. So what's the point in even having cap space? We're probably not going to be able to sign much of an upgrade for under 20 million because you're looking at guys like Ricky Rubio and Terry Rozier getting almost $20 million a year. Trevor Ariza, I believe, got like 13 million. Dwayne Dedmon got 13 million. So you're looking at role players anyway if you don't have more than $20 million in cap space. So it just doesn't make sense to go that route. Obviously, I'll go into more depth in that video. Basically, when we're looking at trading for salary, short term, I honestly don't think it matters because we're not looking at cap space next offseason. The only way in which salary matters is if we trade for a guy like Kevin Love and 3 years from now he's still on the books. That could be a problem because at that point, Yusuf Nurkic, Anthony Simons, and Zach Collins will either have their extensions or be due for extensions. And if we're paying a guy like Kevin Love $32 million a year at that point, and we're paying Dame like almost $50 million, and we're paying CJ, and we have to re-sign Nurkic, Collins, and Simons, then we're looking at an enormous payroll. And if we have a guy like Love taking up $30 million, that could mean potentially having to let go of Collins, Nurkic, or Simons and let them go chase a bigger payday because we can't pay them. So a lot of these contracts are 1 to 2 years, so the salary doesn't really matter in terms of how it affects us building our roster. But for guys like a Kevin Love, that salary in the future could get dicey. So that's kind of how we're approaching this mentally.
And then also, so the Blazers are in kind of a weird contract situation right now where they have Dame and CJ, obviously the big dogs. Nurkic, they're probably not going to trade because why would you trade an injured player you're going to get full value for? So everyone else is either Whiteside and Bazemore are the two most tradable contracts. But they're the new guys. You just brought them in, and everyone's excited to see what they're doing. And then everyone else on the roster is like low, either rookie deals or
the next biggest salary is Rodney Hood making like $5.7 million a year. So with that, we can't trade for pretty much the majority of these targets unless we give up one of Bazemore or Whiteside.
Right.
So
and then also, so Tolliver, Gasol, Hood, and Hazonia are not tradable until December 15th because they just signed this summer. Same goes for any other team that signed a free agent this summer. That also kind of complicates trades because almost like 40% of the league was free agents this summer. So like 40% at least, if not more, is ineligible to be traded until that December 15th date. Some of them even go into the January 15th. But yeah, so a lot of these trades might have to happen later in the year.
But I'd assume that's what would happen because Olshey's never really been one to make early season moves. Even when Portland has struggled in previous even when Portland has struggled early in the season in previous years, Olshey still kind of waited until the trade deadline, and then he's made a move. So I don't expect him to try and do anything early.
And bringing those guys in, he seemed pretty excited in both of their conferences, bringing them in, the press conferences.
Yeah.
I don't think he was looking to trade them immediately. I think Whiteside was brought in to fill in this year for Nurk. Now, the question is going to become, when is Nurk available? How ready is he when he's available? If he is ready and back by February when the trade deadline hits, then that definitely makes Whiteside a huge trade chip. Either he sucks and he's a big expiring contract that we could trade for someone who is an expiring contract, or he plays well and we can use him to have some value, either getting a third team involved that would be willing to get Whiteside so they have his bird rights, and then kind of worked that with a team for one of the guys we're going to talk about here. But yeah, the Nurk situation is going to play a huge factor in that, because if he's not back to even acceptable play by February, it's going to be really hard to trade Whiteside. So some of this trade discussion. And what's really weird is this is the first summer that I haven't really been on the trade machine, like thinking about stuff too much, because like I know we're kind of set for a few months here, so it's not even something that we need to think about right this second. But it is important that we manage this asset well, because if we just lose him for nothing at the end of this season, then what are we doing, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know if it really makes sense to keep him and Nurk involved long term. That's a question that can't be answered right now. So, but yeah, it's going to be fun to talk about some of these guys and some of these hypothetical situations.
For sure. So I think we've done a pretty good job covering all our bases here. Pretty much all these targets are going to involve trading one of Bazemore and Whiteside for him. So I'm ready to hop into the targets if you are.
Yep.
All right. So I have a random number generator. Let me open it up. And we're going to randomly go through these targets. We have 8 main targets, and we're just going to roll and see who we get to start off with. Keep things fun and interesting. So we're going to start off with Robert Covington, who I think is a very interesting target. Now, you guys like the slide there? Yeah, that's pretty solid. So he's the lowest salary guy on this list, I believe, making only $11.3 million. So maybe you could see the possibility of trading Rodney Hood and another piece for Robert Covington. I think you'd have to include like 3 different players. But honestly, that doesn't make much sense. Rodney Hood is a very good, valuable asset. So when you're trading for Robert Covington, you'd probably be looking at trading Kent Bazemore or Hassan Whiteside. I probably wouldn't trade Whiteside for him. So it's an interesting trade target because he does make a little less salary, but they'd have to trade something along with Covington in order to match Bazemore's salary, who would probably be the guy we'd trade for Robert Covington.
Yeah, so Minnesota's in a weird position because they've obviously underachieved the last couple of years. They thought they were on the right path with Cat and Wiggins, and it's kind of not materialized. Now Covington's the last really remaining player they have from the Butler trade.
Yeah.
So I don't know how well they value him. He was hurt most of last year, barely played. I think they played like 35 games or something. The year before that, he was on one of the all-defensive teams, and he's a career, mid-30, 36, 37% three-point shooter. So 3-and-D guy, with emphasis on the D.
He's strictly 3-and-D. That dude doesn't drive at all, man. Like, he'll make a play off the dribble here and there, but he sits behind the 3-point line and he spots up and he spaces the floor, and he's a really, really good defender. But
the T-Wolves have Jarrett Culver now, who they picked up in the draft.
Yeah.
They traded up for him, and they have obviously Wiggins.
And
they'd love to get rid of Wiggins, but they're stuck with him
and they brought in the golden child, Jake Layman.
Layman.
Gotta remember Layman. Hope he kills it this year.
Former Blazers like Vonleh.
Yeah. So they got a lot of.
Did they get Napier too?
Yeah, they got Napier, they got Vonleh, they got Layman. So they're kind of doing the Brooklyn Nets type of thing with stacking up with former Blazers. But so
I could definitely see them.
The one thing.
Yeah,
the one thing that I've heard is that they're searching for cap space for the summer of 2020. So they might be looking for an expiring contract like a Kent Bazemore. They might be looking to simply move off Robert Covington's salary. Now, obviously, they'd want an asset back with getting an expiring contract. But I find that really interesting that they're looking for cap space because we have the expiring contracts to potentially facilitate that for once, which is something we haven't had in previous years. We've always had 2, 3, 4-year poor contracts. So I wonder if that could help us. Yeah. So I wonder if that could help us.
I think the most logical trade I can come up with them would be around the trade deadline would be Whiteside for Covington and Gorgie Zhang.
Yep.
And Gorgie Zhang also has multiple years. I think it's 2 years left at around like 16, 17 million. So that puts it right around even for what Whiteside makes.
Yeah.
And so not only does Minnesota get an expiring contract, but they get out of 2 more years after that of Covington and a pretty big contract for Dang next year.
Yeah, it essentially saved them $27 million next offseason, which is almost a full max slot.
And Zhang's nowhere as good as Whiteside, but if Nurk is somewhat capable by then, it gives us a quality backup both for this year and next year. Also an expiring contract in that mid-range to trade again, so we can discuss all this with him next year.
Yeah, especially during the off-season too, because there's a lot of deals made in the off-season, and we won't have contracts in the offseason that we're willing to trade. You know, we'll have Lillard and McCollum making a ton of money. We'll have Nurkic. But other than that, we won't have any sizable contracts that could help us facilitate a move. Meanwhile, if we had Gorgie Zhang on the roster, he'd then roll over to being an expiring $16, $17 million contract. Then if a team wants an expiring contract, they might value Gorgie Zhang. We might be able to upgrade him into another player. We just have more flexibility in the 2020 offseason.
And Covington would be, I'm not super high on Covington as a player.
Yeah.
I think he's a little overrated. Obviously not defensively, but he shoots, he's a good 3-point shooter for how much he takes.
Yeah.
But like you said, the rest of his game on the offensive end is pretty questionable.
Yeah, but how much
he'd be a really good fit in the starting lineup with Dame and CJ, locking down the perimeter at the 3 spot, especially going up against teams with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and stuff like that. And then he just camps out at the 3-point line and bombs away when those guys kick out to him.
And then what I really like about that is then you slide Rodney Hood to the bench, and you have Rodney Hood as your 6th man. Your bench gets an upgrade like that as well, because I do think Rodney Hood is a little better than Kent Bazemore. If Anthony Simons isn't cutting it, you could see Bazemore and Hood. Actually is interesting. One of those guys would probably have to take a serious minute cut.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, we're worried about wing depth right now. We basically only have Hood and Bazemore to cover those spots. So adding a third guy would actually allow us to maybe move on from Bazemore if he wasn't cutting it.
True.
So we could make 2 of these trades.
But the good thing about Covington is he can slide over and play that small ball 4, so it could open up more wing minutes, because you would have a little bit of a log jam on the perimeter off the bench, because you have Simons, Bazemore, and Hood off the bench. So if you don't trade Bazemore, you could slide Covington over to play some small ball 4 minutes and open up more minutes for those guys. Or as you said, we could flip Bazemore and try and get maybe a guy like Aaron Gordon, maybe a guy like Danilo Gallinari, maybe a guy like Otto Porter. I might be foreshadowing the rest of this podcast, but so.
Well, a lot of that, too, is kind of predicated on how well Simons does.
Yeah.
Because if Simons isn't quite ready this year yet, despite all the hype, Bazemore could kind of slide into that backup point guard range. And then, we'd have a freaking huge second unit.
Oh, yeah. You'd probably have CJ playing with the second unit again with Bazemore, with Hood. For perimeter guys, that's a pretty solid bench lineup. So Robert Covington's an interesting trade target. He's kind of been a favorite trade target of Blazer fans for a while. I've always seen a bunch of hypothetical trades involving Robert Covington, but that's kind of the case for pretty much everybody that we're going to cover.
Yep.
So moving on to our next target. We got Andre Iguodala.
All right.
Which is a very... Do you want to cover his situation with Memphis? You got it.
Yeah, so he is on an expiring contract. I want to say... I'll do something up. It's a little over $17 million. So fits right kind of in that Bazemore contract, straight up.
Yeah.
I think that... first of all, Memphis and him just agreed that he's okay to not report this year.
Yeah, which hurts my overpick of the Memphis Grizzlies that I had in my first podcast, because I thought he was going to play for Memphis and they were going to trade him at the deadline, but whatever.
So you and I are going to disagree on this, but I don't know if he'd be willing to play for us, even though we're a contender. I think he's got his heart set on playing in LA, and that he's not going to accept any other alternative.
He's not in a position of leverage though, so they can trade him wherever they want to trade him.
Oh yeah,
I
sure.
highly doubt that he would refuse to report for a team that would be contending, that has a great culture, that he'd have a good role for. I highly doubt he'd refuse to report for a team like Portland. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to get traded to a bottom feeder. He's getting up there in age. He's used to being on a contending team, so that's part of the reason he doesn't want to play for Memphis in the first place, but he'd have a pretty good situation in Portland, and honestly, the means to get him to the LA Clippers and the LA Lakers, neither of those teams really have the contracts or even the assets to trade for Andre Iguodala, because Memphis is going to want a little something.
Gonna wait till they actually buy him out. Then he can go to whoever he wants.
I mean, but Memphis doesn't have a high payroll though, and you have the minimum payroll that you have to reach. I believe they're right around there. So honestly, it doesn't even financially make sense for Memphis to buy him out. You could honestly see Andre Iguodala choosing not to report and Memphis just hanging on to him all season long until the trade deadline maybe, or even past that, because if they can't get any value for him.
They're at 124 million in guaranteed. So
are they?
Well over the cap. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know.
Because they got Iggy, Jonas. They got those.
They resigned Jonas.
Solomon Hill and Miles Plumlee.
Yeah, that's right.
Chandler Parsons.
Damn,
and then they signed Tyus Jones. They signed Kyle Anderson to a mid-range contract.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so it might make sense for them to buy him out. I don't know.
Okay, so if we were talking about a hypothetical Iggy trade, so obviously Bazemore for him works straight up.
Yeah.
It does add a couple million to Memphis's payroll. I don't think they would do that straight up.
You'd have to at least include a couple future second rounders at the very least.
Yeah, they already got a first for taking on Iguodala though. So
yeah,
it'd be kind of weird if they also got a first round pick for trading it.
Yeah, I doubt somebody will trade a first
for him.
I
don't think it'll take a first round pick.
Yeah.
Then the other interesting player on their team is Jay Crowder, who's at $7.8 million, also an expiring contract. So you combine those two, then you get into the Whiteside range, where you could add two wing players for Whiteside at the deadline if he's still a part of their team.
Or I think you could potentially look at Bazemore plus like Scalabissiere, maybe Gary Trent for Iguodala and Jay Crowder. The salaries might not match.
A couple of young assets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jay Crowder is kind of a backup forward. We're kind of thin at backup power forward. We have like Tolliver, Hazonia, but if those guys don't pan out, Crowder as a backup forward would be good, and then Iguodala would replace Bazemore's role off the bench. And in my opinion, be a little bit of in my opinion, Iguodala would be a little bit of an upgrade over Bazemore, but I know you're not quite so high on him.
I see that situation screaming Evan Turner to me, like someone who can't really shoot. And won't fit in great with Stott's offense, especially at his age.
But he's like a legit playmaker, and he can actually drive, and he's a much smarter player, in my opinion, and a much better defender. So I'm a little higher on him.
Turner has some playmaking abilities.
That's it. That's it.
I just see him being like a kind of a cringeworthy fit in the Stott
Yeah,
system.
I can see it. I can see it.
But it would be good to have. Obviously, he's won championships. He's a great player.
Yeah.
He's just getting up there in age, but
yeah. So something I want to ask the comment section is, would you guys rather have Iguodala or Kent Bazemore? That's something I'm very curious about. Let me know down in the comment section below. Leave your comment, and I know I cut you off. So what do you got?
I was just going to say I would choose Bazemore.
Yeah, he would choose Bazemore. I would probably choose Iguodala just because of his defensive versatility. I think he's a little bit more versatile of a defender than Bazemore. Obviously, his shot has issues, but he has that playoff experience. So Iguodala would be an interesting guy for us to get, but he's probably the lowest priority trade target on this entire list. So
kind of like so Bazemore kind of has this kind of low-key fit in with the team attitude. Iguodala's kind of seemed like a diva this summer, even though I haven't really thought of him that as in the past. But he's kind of blasted Golden State on his way out a little bit and stuff like that. So I just think Bazemore is going to be a really good fit in this system.
For sure. Bazemore is going to have to hit threes, though it comes down to that, because if Bazemore's not hitting threes, then Iguodala, in my opinion, would definitely be an upgrade, because neither of those guys would be able to hit threes. And outside of three-point shooting, Iguodala, I think, is a better overall player. So if Bazemore hits threes, he'll be a very good player off the bench, but if he doesn't, he could be another weird fit like Evan Turner was. So
for sure, Iguodala was a better player.
He's on the decline
during the season. Yeah.
Oh, really, man. So we're gonna move on to trade target number 3.
Who you got?
Danilo Gallinari.
All right. So Gallinari just got traded to OKC in the offseason. He's making $22.6 million this year. So right in that range between Bazemore and Whiteside. You happen to think OKC is going to be somewhat respectable this year. I kind of think they're going to hit the tank mode and try to load up on all those picks.
Yeah, real quickly on that point. I think they probably would have traded Gallinari by now if I feel like they probably had some decent offers for him. I think they're kind of waiting on him. I think they might be thinking about winning next season. Like, they still got a good roster, a decent roster, in my opinion, that could make a playoff push. I think they would have traded him by now if they could have, or if they wanted to.
That's true. What are your thoughts on Gallinari's fit on the Blazers?
Gallinari's an interesting player because he's always been hurt, but last season he was a lot healthier than he was in the past. So it's always kind of hard to tell with those guys. There's guys like Brook Lopez who are, for whatever reason, really injury prone for a few years to start off their career, and then all of a sudden they're very, very healthy and don't have any more injury issues. Sometimes you have players that are injury prone, have a season where they're healthy like Gallinari had last season, and then they're back to being injury prone. So he's had like severe injury issues in the past, and I'm wondering if he even makes it to the trade deadline, because he might not even make it to the trade deadline.
So that's a big risk for OKC then if they're trying to get value for him.
Yeah, but if he does make it to the trade deadline, you're only looking at 2 to 4 months left of basketball, so your risk is a little bit mitigated compared to having him on your roster from the start of the season. But he had a really great season last year. I don't have his stats. I believe he shot like 46% from the field and 43% from 3. And yeah, it was by far his best year of his entire career. And I'm starting to wonder if he overachieved a little bit. I don't know if that level of production is sustainable for him. He is a good shooter, really good scorer, but I don't think he's quite as good as he was last season.
Yeah, he's getting up there too. He just turned 31.
Yeah.
But obviously with 1 year left on his deal, not a huge issue there. But you got to wonder how long he can make it, how deep he could go in the playoffs, even if he was healthy during the regular season. He played 68 games last year, so it seemed like he played most of the season, but still missed 14 games.
For him, that was a healthy season, though.
Right, yeah, exactly. He's kind of like how we talked about Kevin Love in the first podcast. He would be an awesome fit in the Stotts system on offense. Not so good on defense, but he is a little more of a wing type player, so he would be a little better on the perimeter defensively than Love or some of the other players we're about to discuss. He's another one of those guys where I wouldn't really pursue him. If it happened, I wouldn't be mad, but like I don't want to give up like a first round pick for him either. Like I know I probably value picks a little more than some people, but I don't know. I just don't think it's really worth too much giving up for him.
See, I think it'd come down to a package of Bazemore and a first-round pick for Gallinari. Right. I think if a trade does happen, it would be that trade package. Depending on how Gallinari is playing and depending on how Bazemore is playing, I would probably do that trade. But if Gallinari regresses back to how he was before last season, which was a decent player but not as good as he was last year, and Bazemore ends up being able to knock down a lot of three-point shots, then I probably wouldn't trade Bazemore in a first-round pick for Gallinari. So that's a trade that I can't have a definitive answer on right now. I just have to see how those guys' seasons play out.
Right, and once again, you're trading basically a 2-3 defensive player for a 3-4 offensive player.
Yeah.
That's I don't know roster-wise if that's going to be the greatest move as we get into the season.
Yeah.
Because then what do we do at the backup 2 and 3? It just leaves us pretty thin. I'm assuming Gallinari would slide into a power forward spot on.
Yeah, he's more of a power forward than a small forward in my opinion. He's a little bit more effective at the 4. But that also means that if Collins has a really good season, it makes less sense to trade for Gallinari. So Collins' season will also affect my opinion on whether or not we should trade for Gallo. So there's a lot of variables there that we'll have to see play out. And it'll be interesting to watch how Gallinari plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder next year.
Yep. Who's next?
Alrighty. Keep rolling numbers I've already rolled. 4. We got ex-Blazer LaMarcus Aldridge.
Great.
So I've been pretty outspoken on not wanting to trade for LaMarcus Aldridge in the past. I've made a whole Monday mailbag surrounding LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan, which was a trade rumor that wasn't really a rumor, which we talked about on our last podcast, how fans get a little carried away with random trade suggestions and whatnot. But fans still want to talk about LaMarcus Aldridge, so I'll let them hear it from a new voice. I'll let you go in on this one.
So, I have to admit this. I do hold a grudge still. Screw that guy.
Yeah.
He left us high and dry. And, I know that's petty, and I should move on. It's been a few years. It didn't really affect us too much, so it's water under the bridge, I guess. But he basically quit on the team in the middle of a playoff series, and I can't forgive that. He took his own flight home. He didn't show up. He knew it was over then, and it just really bugs me.
Yeah, I feel that. But at the same time, dude's 34, 35, right. Somewhere around there. It does sound, from what I've heard, that he's matured a bit. So it would be kind of a cool story, in my opinion, just kind of like a reconciliation where he comes home and he's a improved person.
So
I don't know.
With what I said, here's how I feel about Aldridge. He didn't fit in at first on the Spurs either.
Yeah.
Actually requested to be traded from the Spurs. Pop had to basically bend over and let him,
which is crazy.
So Pop had to do that.
Yeah. Yikes.
So that just kind of tells me right there, yeah, he's probably matured, but part of me thinks that he's only saying the whole Blazer thing because he realizes that it's not going to really work out long term in San Antonio for him, and that he's probably going to be either traded or not re-signed after his contract's up.
Yeah.
Which I think he has a year left, and then a player option, which is $27.7 million. So he'll most likely pick that up because he's not going to get another max level contract at that age. So part of me thinks he's only saying the whole Blazer thing because he's looking for a next spot, and he realizes that, oh, hey, the Blazers were still pretty good without me. If I would have stayed, it could have been pretty good. So I think his mindset might be coming back that he is the difference, but at his age, he needs to accept kind of almost what we're saying about Melo this summer, where he's eventually going to have to be a bench type player, in my opinion. And I don't know if that's worth paying him $27.7 million the next 2 seasons. And what we've talked about with Love and Gallinari, he's basically a center that is in a power forward's body, and he refuses to play center a lot.
Yeah.
But like, he's not quick enough laterally anymore to defend the
Oh,
perimeter.
yeah. He always had questionable lateral quickness, and now he's getting up there in age. That's only going to decline. I don't want him out there on an island guarding LeBron when LeBron's playing small ball 4, or guarding Paul George when he's playing small ball 4. That's scary.
And then combine that with I do not see him being fine with just being a small part of the offense, no matter what he says.
Yeah.
So he's going to need touches, and he's going to be whiny if he doesn't get touches.
Yeah.
Just like he was in San Antonio. And so I don't know if that'll necessarily flow back into it, because the offense you thought was going to suffer once he left, but it really hasn't been that much different in terms of like efficiency numbers and stuff like that. So it almost makes sense to not have to feed someone touches and stuff like that. He would still be a good fit on offense, and would, just like Love and Gallinari, make our offense. But as we've talked about before, that's not necessarily our problem. So trading for him doesn't solve our defensive problems.
And
we're a top 5 efficiency offense last year, and middle of the pack, like 16th or something defensive rating. So like, we need to improve the defense more so than the offense, in my opinion. And all 3 of those guys help our offense, but don't improve the defense. So it's just a no for me.
Yeah.
But I could definitely see that being one of the situations for Whiteside at the trade deadline, because they make almost the same exact amount of money, and then factor in that Aldridge has the extra year, so that could save the Spurs an extra year. But he's another one of those guys I wouldn't attach assets like first-round picks or anything.
Yeah.
For a 34-year-old Aldridge.
Yeah,
but the problem is he's good enough to where he's still playing at an All-NBA type level, so he's going to demand something more than just an expiring contract back.
And he's also not going to come off the bench. And honestly, with a guy like LaMarcus Aldridge, he's not the most efficient player. The only way he makes sense to me is as a number 1 option, where you can throw it down to him, and he's enough of a threat where, as the number 1 option, defenses are going to double team him, and that opens up some ball movement on the perimeter, where that opens up things for the offense. He's not a great 3-point shooter, and he loves his mid-range, but he's also not the most efficient mid-range shooter either. So having him as just a 4th option in the offense, he's not a super efficient player, and I think he's not going to be able to build the rhythm like he has in the past by getting a heavy diet of touches. So it just doesn't make sense from a fit perspective in that way. And as I've always said, you need 3-and-D players to complement Dame and CJ. You need guys that can shoot threes in order to create space for Dame and CJ to attack, and you need guys who can defend to cover for them, and Aldridge doesn't satisfy either of those things. So I'm not high on LaMarcus Aldridge. He might make sense in a couple years when he's declined a little bit, where he'd be willing to come off the bench, and then with that bench unit, you'd kind of work it around him where he could punish backup big men, but at this point, I don't think he's a viable option.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Obviously, he has 2 years left on his contract, so summer of 2021 it would be, if we sign him to like the mid-level exception or something that summer, that would be a great bargain and perfect at that stage of his career. But at this stage, at his age, making that much money, that kind of handcuffs us and doesn't really put us over the top, in my opinion.
100% agree. So moving on to our next trade target, we have Blake Griffin.
All right. The Tory favorite.
Yes, sir. I'll let you go in on him because I'm going to talk a lot about Blake Griffin because that's my guy.
So, massive contract, injury problems. That's right off the bat, right? So he's got 34, almost 34 and a half this year, 36.8 next year, almost 39 3 years from now, which is pretty crazy considering how many games he misses. I know you're of the opinion the last few years it's been a lot better, so you're not as worried about it.
He's averaging around, he's averaging around like 65 games a season, I believe, for the past 4 years. He's not trying to dunk on everybody. I think that helps.
He has changed his game a lot.
Become a little bit more finesse, a lot more skilled in my opinion, so he's not just trying to bully people and jump over them and being super, super physical. He's still a physical player, but not quite like he was, so I think that's helped him avoid the severe injury issues he's had in the past. He does have his injury issues, but he's also the best player that we're going to cover on this entire list. He's probably going to be the best player that we have a chance of trading for in the next year. And just looking at that upside, if he is healthy, he gives us a really, really solid chance at winning the championship, in my opinion.
Man, how much would the narrative have changed if he didn't have that knee problem in the playoffs?
Yeah.
Because he played 75 games last year, which is a lot for him.
Yeah.
Kind of like with Gallinari, what we were talking about. So he gets hurt right at the end of the year, and I think he actually missed a couple of the playoff games.
Yeah.
So if he doesn't get hurt, has a fully healthy year, like let's say they didn't make the playoffs, so it wouldn't have been as obvious that he was hurt. Like he would probably be like, "Look, Blake Griffin, he played the whole year this year."
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think honestly, like if we did trade for him at the trade deadline, down the stretch, we would probably manage his load a little bit. Rest him every 4 to 5 games, keep that dude pretty fresh, and just see if that helps him play deep into the playoffs and avoid those injuries. We do have a really, really easy schedule after the trade deadline. It's one of the easiest 30-day stretches starting on, I believe, February 9th and going into March. We have such an easy schedule, so I do think that would provide some opportunity for us to rest him for some games, and we'd still have Dame, CJ. At that point, we'd have Nurkic, and we would still be able to easily take care of those games while resting Blake Griffin, making sure he stays healthy. So that could be a possibility if we do trade for him.
Yeah, it was third team All-NBA last year. He'd be a really good fit. He's not the greatest defensive player, but he's better than some of those kind of hybrid center power forwards that we talked about.
Yeah.
Obviously, he can handle the rock. He's improved to a 36% three-point shooter last year. He's got playmaking ability. He rebounds. When a healthy Blake Griffin, other than maybe seems like kind of a dirtbag sometimes.
Yeah.
But his play on the court would fit really well, I think, on this team. So it's just a matter of health with him, I guess.
Yeah,
Detroit's in a weird position. I think that with some of their moves this year, like we talked about in the last podcast, they're kind of going for it this year.
Yeah.
Even though they didn't really make any moves enough to go for it this year. But they signed a lot of veterans that don't make a lot of sense because they don't put them over the top. So I could see that flaming out, even though I said they'd be over the 37.5.
Yeah.
And then trying to get Griffin off the books. Up until this point, I've heard that they want to at least recoup as much, if not more, than what they gave up in the trade.
Yeah.
So they gave up Tobias Harris and a first-round pick and some other pieces like Avery Bradley or something like that. But so basically a level player of Tobias Harris and a first-round pick, which we obviously wouldn't be willing to give them. So something's going to have to change to where they're like, oh, crap, we still suck. We need to get this contract off our books.
Yeah. Before we get into hypothetical trades, I wanted to add something else onto his fit with Portland. Just when you watch the playoffs, man, all teams do is trap Dame. Imagine if you had a pick-and-roll partner for Damian Lillard like a Blake Griffin, who could not only shoot the three, but was really good attacking the rim, a good ball handler, and a really, really good passer for a power forward position.
On the offensive end, it would look a lot like Draymond Green.
Oh my God, it'd be perfect. And then you'd actually have some shooters. You'd have CJ McCollum spotting up. You'd have Rodney Hood spotting up, and then you'd have Nurkic as a dump-off option once Nurkic gets healthy. Teams would really end up struggling if they trap Dame, because it'd be essentially pick your poison. You either trap Dame and let Blake Griffin get in the open court with really, really good options to pass to, or you don't trap Dame, and we know how that goes when teams don't trap Dame. Dame's going to go off, and Dame's going to get his. So it would really make us a team that's a lot harder to guard in the postseason. It would be a lot harder for game plan us. It would be a lot harder to game plan for us, and teams really wouldn't be able to just rely on throwing 2 defenders at Dame all the time.
Yep. If he's there.
Yeah, hopefully, man, hopefully, but
that's always the question.
That's why I think he would give us the best chance out of all these targets to end up winning an NBA championship.
This is gonna sound crazy, but it would almost be easier for us to get him if he did have some sort of minor injury and missed a bunch of games at the beginning of the season, and they were just like throw up their hands and are done with him, But yeah, so what do you think it would take to get him? Obviously, we'd probably have to include Whiteside to try and make the contracts work.
Yeah, there's Whiteside for Blake Griffin. That would that make the salaries work? Do you know?
It's close, 27 something to 34. So I think we probably have to include another small contract. But
yeah, really Gary Trent Jr. would probably make that match, but I think you're looking at.
I don't think they would do that because they have Drummond still, unless they traded him too in a different deal.
Well, yeah, but also you're getting expiring. They would probably buy out Whiteside because they'd be tanking if they trade Blake Griffin for an expiring and young assets. Or they could try and flip him to a third team and maybe get a little bit of value for Whiteside as well. But I think that in a trade for Blake Griffin, you'd trade Hassan Whiteside, and then you'd have to trade 3 of the following: first-round picks, Zach Collins, and Anthony Simons. So that could be Collins, Simons, and a first-round pick, or that could be 3 first-round picks, or that could be 2 first-round picks and Simons. I think it might honestly take that much. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's probably going to, I would say at least Collins, which that's the one player it might not be as bad to lose Collins because we're getting, obviously, someone under contract for 3 years. It would still hurt to lose that potential. It's all going to come back to how he plays again this year as a starting 4.
Yeah.
So kind of looking at, you might have to take on another contract if you're like Tony Snell, $11.5 million this year, $12 million the year after.
Yeah, so that would be something like Hassan Whiteside and Kent Bazemore for Blake Griffin and Tony Snell to save them money on Tony Snell's contract.
Yeah, and then you only have to give up like 2 picks instead of 3.
Yeah,
type situation. But yeah, I wouldn't give up that much for him. If we can somehow get him for like Whiteside and Collins and a first or something like that, I'd probably pull the trigger on it.
Yeah,
but that's a lot.
Yeah, my ideal trade would be Whiteside and Kent Bazemore for Blake Griffin, Tony Snell, and it would be okay. Let me restart on that. We give up Whiteside and Bazemore and 2 first-round picks for Blake Griffin and Tony Snell. Tony Snell would slot in Kent Bazemore's role. Blake Griffin would be the starting power forward, and then Zach Collins would be a great third big off the bench who could play center next to Blake Griffin, or he could play power forward next to Yusuf Nurkic, so that'd be a really good 3-man big rotation, and we'd keep Simons off the bench as well. We'd save Detroit a ton of salary going into next offseason. They'd save on Blake Griffin's contract. That'd save them about $36 million, and then they'd save on Tony Snell's contract, which would be another $12 million. So they'd save almost $50 million in salary.
That's huge, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely huge. And
so basically, they're either going to keep Griffin or they're going to tank and try to get rid of his contract.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a lot of teams that would be willing to take him on, so we might.
Yeah, and especially take on Tony Snell next to him.
Right. So there might not be a lot of competition for him. There might be some teams trying to get him, but not willing to give up more than just an expiring contract. So yeah, I think we'd be in the running if he was traded. It's just going to be a matter of whether it happens or not.
Yeah, there would definitely be a team here or there that come out of nowhere and make a push for him. Maybe Denver Nuggets, if Paul Millsap is on a little bit of a decline because he is getting up there in age. Maybe Boston, since they have a lot of wings and not a lot of big men. Maybe they'd look at trading Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart. You could look at maybe even a team like Indiana, who probably needs another star to kind of get them over the hump into that next tier. Indiana could be a possibility. I don't remember off the top of my head what their salaries are looking like, but you'd have teams like that I feel like could possibly step up to the plate and make a play for Blake Griffin. But I'm not sure.
I don't want to get too off track here, but an interesting team might be OKC.
Dude, I've thought about that.
What if they reunited Paul and Blake Griffin? Oh, they probably hate each other now.
That'd be interesting. And hey, man, this is a podcast, so we can get off track. Yeah. Blake Griffin going home to Oklahoma to reunite with Chris Paul. They'd probably trade like Gallo and like Gallo one of their millions of picks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they might not even need to include a pick if it was decent enough. I mean, Gallo and Schroeder is pretty good.
Yeah, they'd probably flip Gallo to a third team, get a pick from that third team, send it to Detroit, something like that. But Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, Steven Adams, that's not a terrible team. I mean, that's a lot like the Clippers was before. You just have Steven Adams instead of DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul's up there in age. But if they're having a good season, Oklahoma City might elect to make a move like that. That would actually be really interesting to see play out.
Plus, they'd have all those picks still. Like, so they could add a ton of youth, or if they were in a playoff race, they could add another star to those three.
Yeah, they'd have.
The problem is their timeline would be really short. But with all those picks, you could be in the playoff chase, and it doesn't matter if you have other teams' picks because you could still be good, and that your picks aren't. I just see them tanking at some point. It'd just be kind of weird to see.
Well, the thing is, if Detroit's severely blowing it up, maybe Oklahoma City goes with Gallinari, Steven Adams, and Dennis Schroeder, and maybe a pick for Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond.
Yep.
But that, at the same time, that doesn't seem much better than Detroit is now. So, but yeah, Blake Griffin will be.
OKC.
Yeah, I'll be paying a lot of attention to Detroit. I'm rooting against them because I want them to have a 31 season and move on from Blake Griffin, and for us to finally trade for a legit star, a huge name, a top 15 player, because in my opinion, Blake Griffin's a top 15 player. That'd be a lot of fun.
He's under contract for 3 seasons, so we don't have to worry about losing him anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. I think he'd like it here, so that'd be a fun guy to get.
Real quick, one of my trades involves Detroit. So this isn't my trade. This is just something I found from a Detroit forum. So the trade is Bazemore for Snell and Galloway.
Ew. Why? Ew. Why would we take on an additional $12 million in salary next year and trade the best player in the deal?
I'm just wanted to bring some funny.
Oh yeah, dude. So I'm gonna light into these. If they're bad trade ideas, I'm just gonna light into them. I don't care.
I would guess for that to happen, Bazemore would have to be like terrible this year. So the only reason why Detroit would do that is because that would get rid of the extra years for Snell's contract.
Still wouldn't do it. I would rather not have Tony Snell than be paying Tony Snell for the next 2 seasons anyway. So it still doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I think Galloway shot like 40% from 3 last year or something like that. I might be wrong though.
I mean, but he doesn't really do anything else other than shoot threes, and he's like barely been 40%. That was one of the
more minor ones on my list. But
you said you had a lot of trades from fan forums.
5.5%.
Yeah. You said you had a lot of trade from other fans. Have I been going a little too fast for you? Are you missing out on placing those in there?
I'll just go rapid fire at the end here.
Oh yeah, that'll be fun. We can do that'll be fun. We can get a rhythm to it, and you can fire them at me, and I can shoot them down.
So let's trust me, they're not very good.
So
let's move on to the next person.
Yeah, we got 3 targets left. This target that we're going to be talking about is probably my second favorite on this list. That's Otto Porter Jr.
I was gonna say if you said Otto Porter Jr. that's your next closest.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm sure a lot of people watching this that have been with me for a while know that Otto Porter Jr. is my number 2 target behind Blake Griffin. I've been pretty outspoken on Otto Porter Jr. as well.
I basically think of Otto Porter Jr. as Al-Farouq Aminu, but good.
Al-Farouq Aminu on steroids with a jump shot.
Yeah. So I want to say like a 40% career 3-point shooter from the corners.
He's
so
been
playing him there.
I'm gonna look up
because back in the day in college he had some playmaking ability too. I just don't know if the Wizards didn't use him right because they already had Beal and Wall.
That's my opinion. Yeah, because I think he looked a lot better in Chicago making plays with the ball in his hands. And Terry Stotts turned Nicholas Batum into a playmaker, ball handler, and I think that he'd have some opportunity for Otto Porter Jr. to do the same as well. But Otto Porter Jr. is a phenomenal 3-point shooter. Let's look at this. The last 3 years, his 3-point percentage is over 43%, 44%, then almost 41%. 43, 44, 41 from the 3-point line. That is phenomenal. That is like a 3-point specialist at the small forward position. Finding a guy that shoots that well from the small forward position is really, really hard. He's also a really, really solid defender. Now, last year, he did kind of decline in that area, but the year before that, I believe Real Plus Minus had him as one of the best defending wings in the entire NBA, and we know Washington was a bit dysfunctional last season.
So hard with the Wizards.
Yeah, they were dysfunctional last season, and they were losing a lot of games, so his effort probably wasn't there, but when engaged, I think he's actually one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA, one of the most underrated defenders in the NBA. So in terms of a 3-and-D guy, he brings the 3 in spades, man. He's a phenomenal 3-point shooter. He can be a really good defender. And then on top of that, he does have flashes of playmaking ability. At the small forward position, that sounds like the perfect player for us.
Right. And I kind of like him at power forward more than small forward. So he could fill that role and Collins go back to like a 3-man rotation with those guys. So you could start Hood still and have Porter at the 4. And if Nurk isn't back, you could start Collins at the 5.
Yeah.
Kind of small, but that's a pretty versatile lineup there.
Yeah.
And I like his switchability on defense. He's kind of like I said, a Minu Harkless type of defender where you can kind of put him on some smaller guys sometimes, and he holds his own.
Yeah.
But yeah, they didn't really have much in terms of bigs on Washington last year, and I think that's always kind of the problem with defensive stats is you had like Dame and CJ get Nurk, and their defense looks great. Did they really get that much better on defense, or do they have teammates that are better?
Yeah, I think part of it is they're not as worried about getting beat, so they're not trying to take away the 3-point line. And as well as take away the drive, they're just kind of pressuring up, knowing that if they do get beat, they do have a good rim protector behind them, and I believe that can help them play defense a little bit more confidently and a little bit better. So it's probably a little bit of both. Having a big man that can really protect the rim probably helps your defensive numbers, but it also probably gives those perimeter defenders a lot more confidence. That's also a reason why with Zach Collins and Hassan Whiteside starting this season, I'm not worried about our perimeter defense. I think those guys will be confident as hell, and they'll just take away the perimeter, knowing that they got 2 potentially elite rim protectors behind them.
Yep. So the rumor was last season, right before the trade deadline, Olshey had talked with the Wizards and was close to a deal for Porter.
Yeah.
I don't know how true this is, but just what I heard.
And I believe that rumor was after they traded for Rodney Hood as well.
Yes.
That would have been absolutely phenomenal.
You have to think, since he is similar to Aminu, it might have been involving him. Since Aminu started to get not completely out of the rotation, obviously, because he still started. But they were starting to play him less towards the end of the season.
Yeah, he would have made sense with Aminu, though. It could have
been like a Turner and Aminu. I'm just trying to think of what the offer would have been for him. So I was thinking
Yeah.
Turner and Minu, because it gives you an expiring contract, and then one that only has 1 year instead of 2 more years, like Porter does, and then like a first-round pick or something.
With those contracts, it might have been 2 first-round picks.
Yeah, maybe. But then I heard that Chicago came in the last second and offered him Jabari Parker, who had a player or a team option for this year, so it was basically an expiring contract, and Bobby Portis and players like that, which they let Portis go anyway. So
they let Jabari Parker go too. They didn't even keep him. So if we had expiring contracts,
nothing for Porter.
Yeah. So if we had expiring contracts, we probably could have landed Otto Porter Jr. last year. Which is why, if we had to give Evan Turner that contract, I don't know why we had to make it 4 years long. Why couldn't we have made it 3 years long? He still would have accepted that contract because he's definitely not worth $18 million per year. And in that scenario, Evan Turner being an expiring contract, we could have landed Otto Porter Jr. I'm just saying.
This is a good time to mention that having 2 big expiring contracts like Bazemore and Whiteside could potentially, if a team gets in a situation like the Knicks last year, where they're just like, screw it, we're going to maximize cap space this summer.
Yeah.
And wants to dump a good player like Porzingis attached with all their bad contracts. We could help a team like that out and get a player of Porzingis' caliber.
Because nobody saw that trade coming, so
right.
Yeah.
So if this was fast forward to this year and that happened and we had like Harkless and Leonard and Turner all expiring, we could have done something similar to that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that might have been a good or bad thing, but it does give you a lot of advantages that you didn't have in the previous couple seasons.
Oh, for sure.
When you have those expiring contracts.
For sure. That's a lot less likely this season because there aren't the same caliber of free agents next summer. There's no Kawhi, there's no KD, there's no Kyrie. So it's going to be a lot less likely that something like that happens because I don't believe any team is going to be loading up a lot of cap space for next offseason to pursue stars because there's not that many stars. I don't know the list off the top of my head. I just know it's not good.
Yeah. We'll see on that one. So what do you think it would take to get Porter out of Chicago? It's kind of a weird situation where they keep drafting bigs.
Yeah.
And signing bigs, and I don't know.
I think Bazemore or Whiteside would be included. Whiteside could match on his own. Bazemore you'd have to attach like Gary Trent Jr., maybe like Scalabrine to him. But you'd probably be looking at least a first-round pick and then maybe a couple second-round picks and Gary Trent Jr. attached to one of those expiring contracts. That's kind of where I fall.
Do you do Whiteside, a first, and Trent? You do that?
I would do that. I would 100% do that. Whiteside could crush it, but Otto Porter Jr. would have a lot more reasonable of a fit on our team as a starting small forward going forward, while Whiteside would end up Whiteside can't play with Nurkic. Nurkic, I think, is our long-term answer, so Otto Porter Jr. and Nurkic at small forward and center makes a lot more sense than having the dilemma of what do you do with Whiteside and what do you do with Nurkic, and does Whiteside resign this offseason? So I would move Whiteside for a player at a different position if they were equal talent.
One sneaky thing I just thought of with our schedule being so tough at the beginning.
Yeah.
Our first round pick could be looked at, halfway through the season. Oh wow, they're kind of struggling to be in the playoff race. They could be a lottery team.
Yeah.
So you trade them, like a top 5 or 7, top 10 protected pick.
Yeah.
They're thinking, oh, we're gonna get a lottery pick out of this, and then all of a sudden we go like 20-10 the rest of the season and finish in the 5th spot or
even
something.
Even if it's like something that's looking like 15th through 18th, that looks a lot better than like 25th. And with our schedule, like if our pick falls between like 15th and 18th at the trade deadline, we're probably going to be on pace to have a decent finish because of how much easier our schedule gets. So that actually is something that could definitely play in our favor, because right after the trade deadline, our schedule completely lightens up and we could honestly go on a stretch where we win like 13 or 14 games. Our schedule is that easy. And especially if we make an upgrade by trading our pick. So that's a really good point that you bring up. Now, one thing to consider when thinking about trading for Otto Porter Jr., they do have Chris Felicio, who has 2 years left on his contract, making around $8 million a year. That dude doesn't even play for them, even though the Bulls suck. So taking on his contract could help you get a trade done. So you might be looking at Hassan Whiteside, Gary Trent Jr., and a first-round pick for Otto Porter Jr., Chris Felicio, and just making that trade. Portland might have to include a little bit more salary in that, but that is a possibility. It's kind of like that suggestion of taking on Zhang to help us get Covington without giving up any of our young assets or picks. In this scenario, we take on Felicio to help us get Otto Porter Jr., which would mean we would trade less out. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be a good player to take if we wanted to attach like one less asset to help that trade out.
Yeah.
He sucks, but
but
it might be worth having it. It's kind of the equivalent of the Nicholson trade, except for he doesn't have like 4 years left on his deal.
True.
But like he's like that level player, and so
yeah,
it would kind of hurt our cap for a little bit, but
you could also do something like trading Kent Bazemore, Skal Labissiere, Gary Trent for Otto Porter Jr. Maybe you include a pick, and then you still have Whiteside, and you could trade Whiteside for Gorgie Jang and Robert Covington, and then you'd have Robert Covington and Otto Porter Jr. as your starting small forward and power forward, and those guys would match up against, the Kawhis, Paul Georges, LeBron James. They'd both be really good shooters at both forward positions, 3 and D guys. That would be really interesting to see. So that's why I like having 2 big expiring contracts this season, because we could potentially make multiple moves.
That Minnesota deal,
yeah,
and only had to give up like 1 first and maybe some other stuff in the Porter deal. Man, that would be great.
The dream, man. The dream is trading Whiteside and like Gary Trent for Blake Griffin, including like a pick or 2, and then trading Bazemore, Labissiere, Hazonia or whatever, and another pick. Trading that for Otto Porter Jr. and rolling with Otto Porter Jr. and Blake Griffin. Our team, in my opinion, would be the best team in the NBA. That'd be both my guys. That would be awesome. I'm dreaming right now. Oh, man.
Still probably need a healthy Nurk, but yeah.
Oh, dude, that lineup would be insane. You still have Rodney Hood off the bench, potentially still have Zach Collins off the bench, but you might have to throw him in there. You'd have one of Simons and Zach Collins off the bench with Rodney Hood behind potentially the best starting 5 in the league. That would be phenomenal.
Yep.
So that's the dream. So anyway, we got
Good, man, I wasn't excited about a lot of these, but that got me excited.
I hope Olshay's aggressive. I hope Olshay's finally able to get something done for a big name player like this. So we are at the 1 hour 10-minute mark. So we're gonna speed this up. We got 2 targets left. The second to last target we got is Aaron Gordon, who isn't a guy that I'm a huge fan of, but a lot of Blazer fans seem to be really high on this guy. I know me and you share the same kind of opinion on Aaron Gordon, so I'll let you talk, and then I'll go into my thoughts on him.
Yeah, I guess if we didn't have to give up a lot for him, it would be fine, but I just don't like him that much as a player. I don't think he fits well in our system.
Yeah.
He's definitely an inconsistent shooter. Kind of reminds me of like a power forward version of Batum, where like you watch him play and like for 5 minutes you're like, wow, this guy's the greatest player in the NBA. and then that same game, like 5 minutes later, you're like, how did this dude even make the NBA? Like, why don't you just do what you were doing before? Like, it's just, the players like that are infuriating to me. The weird part is he's only 23 or something like that.
Dude,
still.
It seems like he's like 26. But then again, I played in Les Schwab in the same year he played in it, so I guess he should be around my age. But, yeah, it comes down to, dude's not a good shooter, and the dude's not a good defender. So I don't like the fit. He's 23, so he does have upside, but...
Career 32% three-point shooter.
Yeah. So
last year.
He does have some playmaking qualities. He did show some improvement making plays for others and attacking the rim off the dribble. So as that power forward setting that screen for Dame and teams trap Dame, he could be an asset for making teams pay for trapping Dame. But at the same time, like, He's 23 years old. I doubt the Magic are going to give up on him. They have a solid young core. They brought in Fultz. We'll see what happens with him. Isaac has been developing on schedule. He's still very, very young. They got Aaron Gordon. They got Mo Bamba behind Vucevic. They were a playoff team last season, so it's hard for me to see them trading Gordon for young assets because I still think they're going to be a playoff team. And it just doesn't make sense.
So, last 3 seasons, true shooting percentage 53.0, 53.0, 53.8. That's terrible for a power forward type.
Yeah, that's definitely below average.
Total rebound percentage last year was only 11.7% for someone with his athleticism and size. You think that would be higher.
Yeah.
Doesn't really do much on the offensive boards. He should be a monster on the offensive boards. It's kind of like, Whiteside gets labeled as lazy, but like this guy can get away with not doing anything on the court a lot of times. And
I know.
Fans love him because he's won the dunk contest, and
so
he did improve his assist percentage from 11.7 to 16.6. So there might be some playmaking ability kind of hidden there. But man, I don't like. He's not that great of a defensive player. He's okay. I'd much rather have Otto Porter than Aaron Gordon.
Oh, 100%. And I know, everybody's like, oh, he's still only 23, but for that same reason, Orlando would require us to trade them way too much. And, I just don't see it making sense from either standpoint. And Aaron Gordon, the most positive part about his game last season was his playmaking. He did put up solid volume scoring, but it wasn't efficient. He's not a good defender, not a good rebounder for his position, so it's just not a target I like. Honestly, he reminds me a bit, not necessarily in terms of like play style, but in terms of like the qualities he has, he reminds me a bit of Kyle Kuzma. He's overrated for all the same reasons that Kyle Kuzma's overrated. Kyle Kuzma is a very poor rebounder for his position. Kyle Kuzma is not a good defender. Kyle Kuzma is not a good three-point shooter. Kyle Kuzma doesn't even have the playmaking Aaron Gordon does. So a lot of those guys, they'll put up like 16, 17 points per game, so fans will think they're better than they are. I'd much rather have Zach Collins than Aaron Gordon. I'd much rather, at this point, I might rather have Zach Collins than Kyle Kuzma. Those guys are so overrated.
So real quick, I was in Orlando Forum, and they were discussing an Aaron Gordon trade to us, they wanted Bazemore and Simons.
Nope.
Aaron Gordon.
I mean, I can't fault them for coming up with that. That's not a ridiculous thing for an Orlando Magic fan to come up with, especially since I need guards and
it's pretty logical, but
it's logical, but I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't come close to doing it.
I will say, though, that would be a great team for Simons to go to.
Oh,
you just have to unseat Augustine eventually as the point guard. And
yeah. Also, he's from Orlando.
Yeah.
So that might be why they want him so bad, is because he's a hometown kid. So as far as the trade...
I don't know.
I wouldn't give up any of our prospects. I wouldn't give up a first-round pick.
First?
Nope.
A lottery-protected first next year?
Nope. I wouldn't give up a first. It locks us. I don't know. It's just
Bazemore and a lottery protected first.
Who replaces Bazemore? You know what I mean? We'd have to make a follow-up move, and I just don't think Aaron Gordon improves the team enough to justify giving up a first-round pick for him. If we're going to end up trading a guy like Bazemore and a pick, we need to get back better value than Aaron Gordon. So. Right. I mean, maybe he has a breakout season and shoots 38% from 3 and is a more efficient player and shows progress in terms of his rebounding and defense. Then we'd be having a different conversation. But if he performs like he did last year, I'm not making a move for Aaron Gordon. And honestly, Bazemore in a first, I don't think Orlando would even come close to accepting that. So I think Aaron Gordon is the most unrealistic trade target out of probably anybody that we've covered so far.
He did shoot it was close to 40%, remember, for half the season, and then he just fell off and missed every three, and it went down to 35 by the end of the season.
Yeah,
or 33.6.
It was kind of like how Layman was, and a lot of fans were ready to see Layman go. I liked Layman, but a lot of fans were ready to see him go. But they're the same fans that are thinking Aaron Gordon is the next Draymond Green with more athleticism. I don't know, but anyway,
I'm not a fan of Gordon.
Yeah, we'll move on to our last target, who we talked a little bit about in our first podcast. That is the notorious Kevin Love, Lake Oswego's finest. And I'll let you go in on this one. The graphic looks a little weird because Love is such a short name. Graphic looks weird, but I try to fit it in, but it's just Love is like huge compared to the rest of it. But I'll let you go in on this Kevin Love thing.
Yeah, so once again, I'll just make it short and sweet. Great offensive fit, poor defensive fit. That's not what we need.
Yeah.
We need either a little bit of both or more shaded towards defense than offense. And I know he's a huge name. He's, all-star level player in the past. Would help our team out, definitely. But 4 years on his contract, it's just not a great fit, in my opinion.
No, honestly, like, people say, oh, he's a great fit because of his three-point shooting. But believe it or not, Blake Griffin shot a higher three-point percentage last year than Kevin Love. Now, I know Kevin Love was hurt a majority of the year, but
he only played, 22 games?
Yeah, but something. 4 out of his past 5 seasons, Kevin Love has shot under 37.5%. Yet he's labeled as this phenomenal shooter. You compare him to a guy like Robert Covington or especially Otto Porter Jr., and Kevin Love is not the same quality shooter. Like, Otto Porter Jr. would be a much, much better player for us to get than Kevin Love. Much better player. Otto Porter Jr. is a better shooter. He's a much better defender. And that's what it comes down to for me.
He did the year prior, he did shoot 41.5%.
Yeah, but out of the past 5 years, that was the outlier. It wasn't who he is.
What's weird is a lot of those players, like take Aaron Gordon, for example, you'd think would get better looks in Portland's system. But Love played with Kyrie and LeBron. So, I mean, we're not going to get him. At best case scenario, we get him similar looks to what he got in that situation. But I mean, for a power forward center type, I mean, 36% is still pretty good, especially when you consider it was 6.7 attempts per game, so high volume.
Anthony Tolliver can shoot 37% from 3. I'm just saying. Obviously, Kevin Love's a better player, but I mean, if he's overrated. He's very, very overrated. His production has fallen off. His defense is even overrated. People say, "Oh, Kevin Love's a solid defender." He does have his moments, but he's not a good defender.
Question for you: so Cleveland messed up before last season. They signed him to this 4-year extension that takes place starting now.
Killed his trade value.
Yeah, he would have had major trade value as both a good player for the stretch run last year if he was healthy, and as an expiring contract. So let's say they don't sign him to that extension. What do you think he would have signed for realistically, knowing how the center market paid out this summer?
When would he have been a free agent this summer?
He would have been a free agent this past, like 2019, what we just passed.
Probably like for like a short, like 2 to 3 year contract, like around $20 million. Definitely not like the $30 million a year average that he has now. And I don't think he would have gotten $20 million a year for 4 seasons. So you'd be looking at like $60 million over 3 years compared to $120 million over the next 4 years.
So let's just take the Blazers, for example, if we would have traded for him before the extension. So instead of owing him, whatever it is, crazy amount, over $100 million the next 3 years or 4 years, we'd only owe him 60 over 3 from this point.
Which
then
still isn't great.
It's not great, but then you're starting to think it's starting to come down more towards that, like, oh, that's a little bit more respectable now. Like, he'll only be like 33 at the end of that. Like, he could still, if he's healthy, switch to a new team where he's not injured. He could possibly, I don't know. It would have been interesting to see what he signed for, what his market value. Considering
for sure.
Centers like Cousins and Kanter, and I know those guys aren't necessarily as good as Love has been, considering some of their injury history, like Cousins. But yeah, a lot of those centers signed for way under market value. Like Nurkic signed, for $12 million a year or so. Like, there's just not a lot of teams willing to give a guy like Kevin Love $20 million. So you gotta wonder how much he would have actually gotten at his age.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a cool story, him coming home to Lake Oswego. I do understand why fans want the hometown kid. But at the same time, removing that sort of bias towards it, it's just... He's a worse shooter than Gallinari, and he's just as injury prone, and his contract is much, much worse. Like, in terms of the guys on this list, he's at the bottom along with LaMarcus Aldridge and Aaron Gordon. It's just not a fit that makes sense.
His contract is so bad that they'd have to include the assets, which is never going to happen, and that's why he's not going to get...
Well, yeah, I'm going to look up...
like they should have to include a first, like, for expiring contract or something.
Well, you got to think about 3 years from now. I'm going to look up the Portland Trailblazers payroll, and I'm going to add together Dame's salary, CJ's salary, and Kevin Love's salary. So, CJ, like, the offseason of 2022, what is he making? About, like, $34 million, $33 million?
I'll find out exactly for you. Hold on.
Okay. Because in
Love will be making 33 or something.
Yeah.
31.3 that summer.
For CJ?
So, you're talking about the 2022.
Yeah, I can just estimate it, but you're looking at like CJ. Yeah, you got it.
CJ's 33.3. Love 31.3. Dame 43.7.
Okay, so just CJ, CJ plus Dame.
Dame 47.25. Sorry.
That's insane, dude. It goes up almost $4 million. That's insane. So CJ plus Dame is $80 million. Plus Kevin Love, that's like
111.
Yeah, and then you have Anthony Simons, who's up for his extension. If he's killing it, he's going to make some money. You have Zach Collins, who will be a year into his next contract. You have Yusuf Nurkic up for his extension. Like, you combine those guys to that, you could be paying 6 guys like 160, 170 million. The cap's going to go up, so teams are going to have a little bit more money to throw around at a guy like Yusuf Nurkic or Zach Collins or Anthony Simons. So having Kevin Love on the salary books, I mean, who knows if Jody is still the owner, and even if she is still the owner, they're probably not going to want to pay all 3 of Nurkic, Simons, and Zach Collins. So you're looking at Kevin Love potentially completely screwing up that situation there, because at that point, I don't think Kevin Love is going to be any better than Nurkic, Simons, or Zach Collins. I think all 3 of those guys are going to be better than Kevin Love, but you might have to give up on one of them because Kevin Love's contract at that point will probably be immovable. Like, it's going to be a very tough situation. If we took on Kevin Love's contract, it would definitely cause us some problems down the road, and the upside with him as a player is not worth it because I don't think he pushes us to that next tier. We might win an additional game or 2, depending on what we give up, but that's it.
What's weird is Love is he's still kind of on that end of his prime type age, but I don't think he's ever going to be prime Love again. He just seems like he's just a shell of his former self. And sometimes with those players, they seem like they're going to be fine for a while, and then the bottom falls out on them. And I'm afraid of him just being like a average player plus that contract. Like, that's just really bad. Yeah. And it doesn't have the upside of Blake Griffin, so I agree with you there.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Blake Griffin only has 3 years on his contract too, so by 2022, I believe that's when Blake Griffin would become a free agent. Let me see here. Yeah, 2022 is when Blake Griffin becomes a free agent. At that point, either he's still really, really good and you extend him, or he's not still really, really good and you might be able to re-sign him for a smaller number, or you just let him walk and you keep your 3 young assets if they're better than Blake Griffin.
Yep.
So that's why I think Blake Griffin makes a lot more sense, because that offseason is when Nurkic's contract goes up for extension. That's when Simons' contract comes up for extension. So 2022 would be very important, and Blake Griffin provides that upside. So a lot of people like to say Kevin Love and Blake Griffin. You want Blake Griffin, but you don't want Kevin Love. Blake Griffin has the injury issues that Love does, and Blake Griffin has the contract issues that Love does. But that explains why I would much rather have Blake Griffin than Kevin Love. I don't want Kevin Love. Blake Griffin's my number 1 target.
Sounds good.
So we're
real quick while we're on Cleveland. So this one made me laugh really hard because they have like a site that came up with this idea, and then I found several other forums and sites from Cleveland, like all discussing like what a great trade this would be for both teams. It would be so great. So Portland trades Whiteside and Nasir Little to Cleveland, and we get back Tristan Thompson and Matthew Dellavedova.
What? I was expecting Kevin Love included in that.
No, this was a non-Love one, but...
Okay, Tristan Thompson, screw that guy. That's, screw that guy. Matthew Dellavedova, that dude's dirty. Like both those guys. I don't like either of those guys. And then from
both expiring contracts, but so is Whiteside. Like, so why would we give up Little on that situation?
Yeah, Whiteside to Tristan Thompson. Definite downgrade. And then Nasir Little for Dellavedova. Yeah, right.
Dellavedova isn't even like a playable rotation piece in the playoff.
Like Simon
Tristan Thompson, a downgrade from Whiteside.
Yeah, no, that's awful, man. That's awful.
I just laughed out loud. I had to bring you that.
I love reading those because it's like, man,
but
there's so many.
So funny. They're all like, oh my goodness, this would be perfect for Portland because they would get a veteran, playmaker, ball handler. And then you have Tristan Thompson, who would solidify their front court. And
oh, that's so bad. There's so many riders out there that just toss. They just fling stuff at the wall, and they're just like, all right, I'm going to toss out these names. Great trade for both teams because this guy's a veteran and this guy's a young guy, and they want those guys, so great trade for both teams. That's literally the extent of the analysis that goes up into it, and oftentimes I see trades where they wouldn't even work under the CBA, and it's like, what are we talking about here? How are you writing for a national media source? Because it will be writers for like Bleacher Report or other sites like that, and it's just like, how?
Yeah.
How do you have your job? How do you do what you do?
As we discussed at the beginning, they include players that can't be traded right now, and stuff like that, and like.
Yeah.
Like, we can't trade Hood right now. Like, why are you including him in a trade that you say would happen this summer, you know?
It's so bad. So, toss me your other trades. That's what we'll do before signing off here.
Once again, I want to preface this by saying these are not my trade ideas. These are just ones I found on the internet that I thought would be fun to discuss. So, we kind of mentioned this guy with Aldridge, but it's DeRozan. So the first one is Bazemore, Hood, and 2 firsts for DeRozan.
Bazemore,
and this would have to take place after December 15th, obviously. Bazemore, Hood, and 2 firsts for DeRozan.
Why? DeRozan's a terrible fit with Portland. Because he can't defend, he can't shoot, he needs the ball in his hands to be effective, yet I think he's worse with the ball in his hands than Dame and CJ. So DeRozan makes 0 sense, especially giving up assets like that.
People just see the name and...
Yeah, people get too caught up with the name. I honestly think Rodney Hood might be just as effective as our small forward as DeMar DeRozan would be, because Rodney Hood can play a lot better off the ball, so when the ball's not in that small forward's hands, it'll be better to have Rodney Hood than DeMar DeRozan.
I hope you're right, because that would be good for our season if that's true.
I mean, I'm just not high on DeRozan. Given our, if we needed like a star player and we have like a lot of shooters, and we needed a guy to kind of like run our offense, and because he is a good distributor, he is a solid scorer, then I would be on board to trade for DeRozan if it would help us like contend, and we need that star. Just with our roster makeup, it makes no sense to add a guy like that next to Dame and CJ and even Yusuf Nurkic. So. And
how do you split up the touches between?
That's a nightmare. You'd probably just try and have 2 of those 3 on the court
just CJ
as often as possible.
CJ and DeRozan alone trying to split up who gets to try to go 1-on-4. And
but like Yusuf Nurkic, if he gets back to the way he was last year with his passing ability, and with how he was effectively scoring the ball, his touches, how would you split them up, including his as well? That'd be tough. So I'm not high on DeRozan.
I probably should have mentioned this one when we discussed Gallinari. So Portland gets Gallinari, Dallas gets Whiteside, and OKC gets Courtney Lee, Dwight Powell, and a Portland 2020 first. So basically, we're back to the Whiteside and the first for Gallinari.
That's
which is probably
not
about good range. I don't know
yeah.
if Dallas would give up Dwight Powell in that deal, but
I mean, if Dallas was making a playoff push, they'd upgrade without giving up a pick, because they're trading Dwight Powell and Courtney Lee. You said,
yeah.
So Dwight Powell is one of the most underrated bigs in the NBA.
Whiteside was one of the people that I think Dallas met with Whiteside. Wasn't he one of?
I'm pretty sure.
He said way afterwards that Portland was their second choice, but I think at the time Dallas was one of the people he interviewed with or something.
Yeah. I mean, like, the thing is, like, a 3-team trade sending Whiteside to another team will probably make the most sense if we're trying to make a move for any of these guys, because most of these teams, if they're trading the players we've listed, they're going into tank mode, so they have no need for Whiteside. So if Whiteside's killing it, you might be able to get, like... Thing is, Dallas doesn't have their picks. And in terms of young prospects, they don't have a ton of them that they'd be willing to trade. But like maybe like a Jalen Brunson. Maybe they'd be willing to move on from Jalen Brunson to get a guy like Hassan Whiteside if Whiteside's having a good season. And, you know, if you're talking to a team like Detroit, and instead of sending them Whiteside, maybe you send Whiteside to Dallas, and Dallas sends Courtney Lee and Brunson and another contract to Detroit because Detroit would value Brunson, and maybe that would help you make a deal for a guy like Blake Griffin. 3-team trades are complicated, but a very good chance that if we do trade Whiteside, that it's in a 3-team trade, constructed something like that.
But that basically comes down to Whiteside and a first for Gallinari, which we already kind of discussed.
Yeah.
It does save us about $5 million though off our tax number, which could be intriguing if we're kind of struggling. I don't know why we give up a first to do that, but I don't know. There is some potential there if you're a big fan of Gallinari. He's having a good year again, and you're willing to give up a first for him.
Yeah.
I don't know if that exact trade would be it, but that's like we discussed.
It's not terrible.
Pretty close to what you'd have to offer him.
Yeah, it's not bad.
All right. So I happen to come across a lot of interesting trades involving Toronto and other teams, not necessarily the Blazers, trying to get players like Kyle Lowry and Marc Gasol. Now, one player we didn't talk about and who isn't mentioned here, but I know you'd be high on trying to go after Ibaka at some point.
Yes,
right?
yes. I didn't even think about him when we were prepping this podcast. Yeah, because I mean, like, he's getting up there in age, but I still think he can play either power forward or center, and he has shown at times throughout his career that he can knock down the 3-point shot. He's kind of inconsistent from year to year, but Whiteside can't play with Nurkic. Both those guys, in my opinion, deserve more than 24 minutes per game. There's 48 minutes in a game, so if you were to divide them up evenly, Whiteside and Nurkic would play 24 minutes. But both of them deserve more than that, in my opinion. So if we could trade Whiteside for a big of equal caliber, but that big could play power forward and center, then you could play that big with Nurkic, and it'd make a lot more sense from a rotational standpoint, and that's where Ibaka fits in, because I believe Ibaka can still play a little bit of power forward, so you could get Nurkic like 27 minutes a game once he returns to the form he showed previously, and you could get Ibaka like 27 to 30 minutes a game with Ibaka playing 21 at backup center and like 6 to 9 at that power forward spot, and maybe you bring Ibaka off the bench behind, you know, Zach Collins and Yusuf Nurkic. Ibaka is a good veteran, especially for Zach Collins, because Ibaka earlier in his career was one of the best shot blockers in the NBA, and then he developed a 3-point shot. He just didn't really do it at the same time. The ceiling for Zach Collins would be being Ibaka as a shot blocker, like how Ibaka used to be, and being Ibaka as a 3-point shooter, when Ibaka has had like previous seasons where he shot like 35 to 37%. So I really like Ibaka's fit. And if Toronto is looking to move on from Ibaka and they're tanking, maybe they trade Ibaka for Whiteside and a couple second-round picks, maybe Gary Trent Jr., and then they would try and move Whiteside to a team like Dallas and get back a little bit more value. I definitely think Ibaka could come into play. So,
yeah, so we kind of discuss this on our over-unders, but Toronto seems like a team that could be happy they won a title and either just let those players like Lowry play out their career there, or they could just be like, oh, we're going to get you to a contender now that we know that we're not contending anymore.
Yeah.
Or they could be good and still be in contention in the East since it's not really that strong. So they could go a million different ways. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that there was a lot of teams, like this example involves the Orlando Magic wanting Kyle Lowry, which would definitely be an upgrade.
Yeah, he'd make sense.
Lowry's range or age, and so you add a vet point guard to their mix of young players. So Toronto would get Kent Bazemore, Gary Trent Jr., a second from us, Markelle Fultz, and a first from Orlando, and we get Evan Fournier.
No.
So
no, I don't think Fournier is any better than Bazemore. And then we gave up a little bit. I kind of forget. You said like Gary Trent Jr. in a second.
Trading Bazemore, Trent Jr., and a second.
Nah, Fournier, terrible defender. Not a great shooter. He's had some flashes, but he's not a great shooter, and he's not great inside the arc. I don't think Fournier is any better than Kent Bazemore, and Fournier has 2 years left on his contract, I believe. Is that correct? 17.1.
Well, he has a player option for the second year.
He's going to take that because he's 17 million. He's not worth that. So I would not trade for Fournier because Bazemore is the better option, and his bad contract only has 1 year left on it for 2. So no to Fournier.
Okay. And then another three-way trade involving Toronto. So Toronto gets Steven Adams and Nasir Little. OKC gets Hassan Whiteside and a Portland second. So we're giving up Little, Whiteside, and a second. And Portland gets Marc Gasol.
That literally makes no sense from every team's standpoint. I mean, like, OKC, it makes sense if they're trying to save salary, but they still might be making a playoff push, so Hassan Whiteside could still help them win games, but then he expires.
Okay, so, yeah, from the OKC's perspective, that's what they were saying. Because they were trying to trade Adams this summer for cap relief.
Yeah.
So that saves them a year off Adams because he still has 2 years left.
Yeah, so I guess it makes sense from OKC's standpoint. From our standpoint, how does it make sense? Trading Whiteside for Marc Gasol, like, that just seems like making a move for the sake of making a move. I don't really see that as an upgrade. Gasol's getting up there in age. And we'd still have the same problem with you can't play Gasol and Nurkic together, so...
Yeah. This goes back to, obviously, if Nurk's out all season. So... if Nurk doesn't play much and Whiteside just is a terrible fit, I could see something like this just to try and salvage the season.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of variables that have to go wrong in order for it to get to that point. And then we'd have to give up. I mean, it's not extreme value with Little because he's still pretty unknown.
Still, it's not worth it.
But yeah. But I see Toronto picks up a small forward prospect and gets Steven Adams, who you could say maybe well, he definitely is younger than Gasol and has a little bit better future, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
a championship level big. We pair the Gasol brothers together.
I mean, that would be kind of cool, but makes less sense from our standpoint than any other teams. It just seems like swapping 3 centers around.
Yeah, the Gasol brothers and the Lopez brothers would both be on the.
Oh, that would be a fun matchup in the NBA Finals. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Like I said, I saw a ton of ones where like Lowry going to like the Spurs or Lowry, Gasol to different places. If they become sellers at some point, those players could become worthwhile discussing.
Yeah.
All right. So
how many trades we got left?
Just a couple.
Oh, okay.
So I have a couple of small ones, both involving Scal. So 76ers forum was mentioning Scal for Thibault. What do you think about that?
It's just like, yeah, and it's just like, who knows?
The other one is to the Bulls for your boy Chandler Hutchison.
Oh, see, like, I'm still high on Chandler Hutchison. I don't think Chicago's a place to succeed for a prospect like that. Like, unless you're a guy like Markkanen who's like a blue chip prospect, like... Chicago hasn't shown that they could develop marginal prospects into good players, but I'm really high on Chandler Hutchison. Great work ethic. I think that he's long, lanky, solid athleticism, is able to be a little bit crafty around the rim. His shot just needs to be refined. His form probably needs to be changed a little bit. But if he can knock down shots, combine that with his defense, combine that with him being a pretty decent player in transition, like he has a lot of potential as a prospect. Labissiere for
I still feel the same way about Scal. Like I still think.
Oh yeah, you can say all the same things about Scal. So it's just like swapping prospects like that. It just doesn't make much. Yeah. It just doesn't make much sense to really do that. I don't know why both teams would value the other one over the guy they got.
The Thibault one, the only thing I could think of is if we're really struggling defensively on the perimeter. And our rotation of the bigs is solid. We can afford to give one of those guys up.
Yeah, but like, why would Philly want to trade Thibault? I mean, maybe if they need a big that can shoot a little bit, but it's hard to see deals like that happening. Swanigan for Labissiere, in my opinion, was kind of a fluky deal because you just don't often see teams like that. And Labissiere was kind of getting screwed over in Sacramento. I think Sacramento realized that and was like, sure, we'll give you a new chance somewhere else, and we'll take on this guy.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of our commenters has mentioned this one. So Whiteside would be kind of a fit for the Hornets possibly. And they have a couple of expiring deals like a Marvin Williams and an MKG coming back. I think Marvin Williams would be a pretty good fit if we need some if our power forward position's kind of a little bit. But I don't really like having to take on. I hate MKG.
I mean, like, if we could flip him into like a solid backup center to play behind Nurkic at the deadline, it would kind of make sense. But MKG gives you all the problems that a guy like Harkless did, except he's a worse shooter. He's a lot like Harkless, but he's a worse shooter and not quite the interior threat that Harkless was offensively. So I'm not high on MKG. Whiteside for Hornets doesn't make sense because they're not going to win more than 20 games. So why would they want Whiteside? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Cody Zeller's probably their best player. He's a center.
So just for fun,
Whiteside
for Batum. How much would you have to get back along with Batum to do that deal? Batum, one of the worst contracts too.
I don't really like their prospects. I probably wouldn't do it. I mean, Batum would give you a contract that you could trade in a potential sign and trade for somebody in the offseason or in a potential move as an expiring for a guy like Blake Griffin should he become available. But obviously we need some sort of assets back with that. Miles Bridges.
Would you do it for their first? Just one first? No, if it was like unprotected.
Oh, their first next season?
Yeah.
1,000,000%.
That would be intriguing.
1,000,000%, because then you'd have potentially.
There's no reason for them to do it, but.
Oh, they wouldn't do it unless MJ is really that cheap. But then you'd probably have another team like willing to swap their pick. You know what I mean? I'd swap our pick. I'd do it for the rights to swap our pick for Charlotte's pick, and I'd trade Whiteside for Nicholas Batum, because then Nicholas Batum is an expiring contract next season, and you'd have a top 5 pick to attach to him, and you could seriously make a move for a big-time star in a trade. Or if you kept him, Nicholas Batum could kind of come back next season. You'd let Bazemore walk. Batum would fill Bazemore's role off the bench, be like that kind of secondary ball handler as a fit. I don't think he'd be terrible off the bench with a guy like Simons. And you'd have whoever you drafted that would probably be top 5, who would be like potentially a future all-star. I need to go look at prospects. You know, LaMelo Ball, psych. Just kidding. Hell no. I'm not high on LaMelo, but like, you got some.
Let's not get into.
Yeah, let's not get into draft picks. But I mean, like, you're talking about having like a Batum would come off the books in 2021, and you'd keep the stud blue chip prospect to develop with that young core. I would definitely do it. I'd even let Charlotte swap their pick out for ours if they wanted to trade Batum for Whiteside.
Yeah.
So.
This next, this is my last one. So it involves someone who low-key was one of the worst signings, in my opinion, of the summer.
Better not be Terry Rozier.
What's that?
Better not be Terry Rozier.
It's not Terry Rozier.
Okay.
So he had a decent year last year, but the Spurs gave Rudy Gay a 2-year, $14.5 million per year contract, which seems like really high for me.
I kind of like Rudy Gay.
Yeah, he's 33 though. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Like, that seemed almost $15 million for him after. I think they had him for a couple years, much lower than that, didn't they? Or a year at least.
Like 10 to 12 million, something like that. If it was a 1-year deal, it would be a lot easier to make a move for.
So, this was out of a Spurs forum once again. We get Aldridge, Gay, and Podol, and give up Whiteside, Bazemore, Trent Jr., Nas, and a 2020 first.
Gay. I like Pirtle, which is actually how it's spelled like Poeltl, but it's like Pirtle. It's super weird. I like Pirtle as a backup center behind Nurkic. He actually provides a lot of the same qualities that Nurkic does, and he's young. I'm not high on LaMarcus Aldridge. Yeah, if it was like a player like Otto Porter Jr. instead of LaMarcus Aldridge, I'm jumping on that trade immediately. But I'm not high on LaMarcus Aldridge at all, so I probably don't do that trade. I don't really mind Rudy Gay. That second year, if he declines, could become a bit of a problem. But, I mean, next season he'd be expiring, and you could probably toss him into deals for other players and flip assets. It is tough giving up little. And a 2020 first-round pick. I'm not super high on Trent, so he's just kind of a throw-in for me. But I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that trade. But that's not a terrible trade. That actually makes me. That's one of those trades that makes you think before you end up saying no. Not one where you're just where you wouldn't even answer the phone if you were a GM. So that's actually an intriguing trade. I think some Blazer fans would actually take that trade. If you would take that trade, leave a comment down below. I would like to hear all your guys' opinions on these trades. I kind of wish we were broadcasting this live so we could see your live reactions to some of the trades he's sharing with me. Because that Spurs that one's interesting, but I probably say no to that. What would you say to that?
I would say no too. As we discussed, I'm not high on Aldridge. I'm not high at Gay as fit on this team as well. I just think that's too much to give up in that situation. Yeah. Most of the guys we discussed, I don't like attaching picks or assets to them unless they're a couple of the higher ones we talked about. Yeah.
Alrighty, so that wraps up all we got.
There you go, guys. What did you think of all our trade talk? We'd love to hear from you guys. If we miss some people that you want us to discuss in future podcasts.
Oh, so you cut out a little bit on me. I'm gonna have you re-say that. We're an hour and 50 minutes in, and that was the first technical difficulty. So I'd say that's a success in my book. What'd you say?
I just said if people have some trade suggestions or players that we missed, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. For sure. And we'd also definitely get to more trade talk in future podcasts. So keep those ideas coming.
For sure. So that wraps up this marathon of a podcast, hour and 50 minutes. Leave a hashtag Rip City in the comment section if you watch this whole thing through to this point. We greatly appreciate those of you who stick through this whole entire thing with us. We are going to start posting timestamps in the description, though, so you guys can kind of like pick out portions of the podcast that you want to listen to, because I know not everybody has a full 2 hours to listen to this, but if you listen to this whole thing, greatly appreciate your support. So I think that's going to do it for us. We'll be back on Friday. We already have that podcast planned out, but I can't remember what we planned. Do you remember what we planned? What's up?
Don't forget the tagline at the end.
Oh yeah, you got to remind me every time. Yeah, you're just gonna pause me and you're gonna say, "Hey Tori," so I'm gonna be like, "What?" Tagline.
We're not in the same room this time, so I had to say.
Oh man, I thought you were saying you didn't want to say it. That's why you tried to write it. You better say it. No, dude, I don't know how else to end my podcast or end any of my videos. I don't know how else I'd end it without that. That's so second nature. I don't even hear myself saying it. It just kind of naturally comes out at this point. So, anything you want to add before we sign off?
No, I just love talking trades, so this has been fun.
Yeah, man.
It went long, but I think we had to.
You got to get up in 3.5 hours. What are we doing?
I don't know.
You gotta go get
We'll
an
figure it
energy drink or something. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's it for me. That's it for Eric Brandt. Thank you guys for watching this podcast. As I said, we'll be back on Friday, so I hope you tune in then. And as always, with the sign off that Eric loves so much, peace out. Go Blazers.